following is a Comfortably Zoned Radio Network production.
We are back. Canna Chat in the Zone. I'm Ralph Sig Tyko with the Comfortably Zoned Radio Network, and welcome. I'm from Alameda, California, right across the bay from San Francisco, and this is an interesting podcast. We talk cannabis, and I've got interesting people to talk with. My guest today is a fellow by the name of Paul Hartman, and he lives in Jamaica. Now, when I say hello to him, you may realize that his voice sounds familiar. Hello, Paul.
Hello, Ralph. How are you doing?
Nice to talk to you. I'm in California. You're in Jamaica. From what I understand, you were raised back east.
No, not really. I was born in Brantford, Ontario, Canada, and my parents and siblings and I moved to California when I was 4. And I grew up in Orange County in L.A. and grew up in the music culture and cannabis culture of the 60s and early 70s.
Okay, tell the audience why your voice sounds so familiar to us.
Well, this is an interesting thing about the sound of my voice. My middle brother was the late comedian Phil Hartman, who died in 1998. And I'm the youngest of the 3 brothers. And, of course, you genetic heritage and sharing a bedroom with somebody for decades, you end up having a lot of similarities. And speech was one of them. And when Phil died, a crazy thing happened after his death, and it happened continually. And I was going to 2 psychiatrists. And I would, have a conversation with somebody who didn't know me, was unrelated, didn't know about Phil's death or the circumstances of it. And somewhere in the conversation, they would start calling me Phil. And it freaked me out, right? And then I would order something online. Or call in and phone order something, and it would come addressed to Phil. And I'd be like, this is really freaking me out. So I asked them, and they said, well, it's, a pretty simple thing. Your voice signature is like his. You have certain talking characteristics that are similar to his, and voice cadence, and they said, and they hear your name, and then they hear your voice, and because they were connected to Phil through humor, it leaves a special chemical bond with people because of the endorphins that are released during laughter. And they said this experience was unique to musicians and actors and artists, basically. And so it kind of alleviated the part that freaked me out about the whole thing, but
absolutely,
it's always kind of been there.
You're a first-time guest, and we go right to your brother. Folks may not know, we talked off the air, and you gave permission to refer to him, and I'm not just using him as a way to, get ratings.
Well, Phil is very relevant to my cannabis use because he gave me my first joint. And
really?
When I was 13 in Los Angeles, the easiest drugs to get in L.A. during the 60s were pills and different pharmaceuticals, like Seconal and Tuinal and Benzedrine, and people were doing drugs like those because they were cheap and easy to get. Cannabis was kind of hard to get, and and so Phil gave me a joint in the hope that I would steer clear of those other harder drugs And when he gave it to me, he said these words. And this is a quote that I have taken to heart and use it as part of my personal philosophy about cannabis. And that is that he gives me the joint and he says, Paul, he goes, alcohol is for people who don't care and don't care to think. And he said, cannabis is for people who care and care to think. And that kind of became my basic hippie philosophy on it, being raised by him and my oldest brother, who is a legend in the music business. He put the Eagles together. The first artist he signed was Sonny and Cher, and he managed 150 of the biggest artists in rock and roll. So it's one of those things, and I grew up in this music art culture in California at the beach and was a surfer and did my first smuggle from Mexico when I was 19, backpacked 100 pounds into Arizona, and that became my lifestyle. I spent a lot of time in Mexico and lived in Oaxaca, did some growing in Mexico and Colombia and other places in the world. California, I've grown all over California. And I became a legend in the entertainment industry for the quality of my weed. And all my weed went into Hollywood. People like Jack Nicholson and Robin Williams and Ringo Starr and people that I had contact through my family and relationships in the music business. And I became one of the suppliers of the finest to famous studio musicians and producers. And, one of the jokes was that if I had a bad season, there were shitty movies for 3 years and bad music for 2.
That's beautiful. That's beautiful. Are you comfortable talking about the circumstances behind your not living in America?
Yeah, I don't really have a problem with it. I had a long career in the industry in the States and had some run-ins with the law. And eventually, after 9/11, it led to my deportation back to Canada. And after a little stretch of prison time in California State Prison, and it left me pretty post-traumatic stress disordered when I finally got back home here, and had to deal with that for a number of years, but it's abated somewhat since legalization. It's still a second nature to not trust the police and things like that. But it's a different world now. It's very interesting what's going on.
Would have you preferred decriminalization to legalization? Not personally, but for the sake of the drug, if you want to call it that, the herb.
Well, here's the problem I'm observing with the whole thing across the board internationally so far. And it seems to me that they didn't legalize this plant. They created more ways to disrupt the process of the use of it. They gave us some loopholes with medical and things like that, but in Canada, they added 45 new ways to get in trouble with cannabis, right? And that's not right, and they're keeping the people who created this industry, the people who suffered like I did through decades of persecution and wrongful accusations and accuse of simply being a drug addict, and that there is no medicinal value, and that then you find out that they knew about it since the 70s, that it worked on cancer. My feeling is that there better be...
That is a slap in the face to society.
Absolutely. It's not only that, it's genocide. Think about the suffering and the lives that were lost in the process because of somebody's greed. And it just comes down to that. It's very simple. You know, greed is the thing that needs to be outlawed. You know, there should be no wars for profit. Nobody should be able to sell weapons for profit to another country. That's bullshit. You know, all this stuff that they perpetrate on everybody in the guise, under the guise of protecting us, has all been a lie for 100 years. You know, and they owe us an apology. I want it. I want that apology. I know I'll never get it because Canada isn't going to normalize the use of it in any way. And it's pathetic how they're going about it.
All these years, I thought Canadians had a much more liberal look at marijuana or at cannabis than we did in California. I'm shocked at that. I really thought it was close to being legal way before California.
Well, the fact is that before legalization, it was more legal. You know, and they, you know, to get to the word legalization, and not by the word of the definition of legalize, right? It's not even anywhere in sight, right? It's so far off the mark, and the political reasons why these things happen are obviously big pharma. Everybody is so fucking in the pocket of these assholes, and they're going to lose billions and billions of dollars. And Jesus, heaven forbid, they might have to buy a smaller house in Cape Cod or something, you know, or Martha's Vineyard. It's just pathetic.
I'm laughing,
you know?
but
So
it's not. It's one of those things that are funny, but they're not funny. You know what
it's like a big example is a good friend of mine, Ben Tang. He is one of the owners of King Clone brand in San Jose. When they originally issued 125 licenses in San Jose. There's only 15 active ones now. I was just chatting with a friend of mine from Humboldt. She has a license in Humboldt. She's one of 341 licenses. And they have squeezed the people up there so frickin' hard that people are just getting out of the business. Like, they don't even want to do it anymore. It's like they destroyed the industry by making it legal, and the illegal industry is absolutely gone mad in California, like beyond what it was when I lived there. I see pictures of my valley where my farm is. My ex-wife still lives on the farm, and they're growing right out in the open illegally, like doing acres outside, you know, and it's mind-boggling that it's going on like that. And but legal and illegal, you know, like it's crazy. Right. But here in Jamaica, it's a different story. You know, they are taking a somewhat more sensible approach to it.
Does the government take taxes for it in Jamaica?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, it's definitely a revenue stream for them, and it's doing good things for communities. You know, the community that we're in here is doing quite well because of mostly the construction phase here has been going on for more than 2 years. So,
is it a fair enough tax that it doesn't make the black market flourish like it does in California?
Well, you know, it's different. It's so different here. You know, the black market here is like California in that sense. It's been here a long time. But what they're doing is they're creating a more plausible approach to how to integrate those people into the system. For instance, we're in St. Mary's Parish, and we're allowed to have growers underneath us. So we can make deals with anybody who's interested in becoming a grower and help them in the process of getting their state Tier 1 license and give them the technology and the seeds and a system that takes the product from them, pays them for it on the spot, and sets them right back up with new plants and all the testing that's required to make it work for them. And this style is going to be the model here in Jamaica. And we're going to be allowed to do that in 3 parishes at one time. So we're going to end up with hundreds of growers under us. And then basically our primary function is to make oil out of it. And so we're a crude processor, although we have dispensary licenses and manufacturing licenses and stuff like that.
Wow. You've taken adversity and really made it work for you.
I was in the right place at the right time. You know, people found me and I found them, and there was a lot of adversity that kind of pushed that in the direction. The person who originally hired me for the job had a stroke right afterwards, and nobody else in the company really knew about it except for the CEO knew that they had been talking to me, and I later found out that they had been researching me for almost a year. And so that was pretty interesting. And it's a different approach for what's going on here. We're going to be a company that operates on the international level of compliance from Jamaica as our stronghold. And we have sub-licenses in Canada and soon Greece. So we're moving along, but we are a privately held company with 500 shares issued and only about 20 shareholders. So it's a whole different ballgame. It's not a stock scam like a Freya or Canopy or any of the big Canadians that are doing really embarrassing things.
Paul, you know, what with legalization, our audience is attracting a whole new group of folks. They don't know about marijuana. They don't know about cannabis from years ago. What were the misconceptions of the herb? Let's put it that way. People don't know that it was scorned. And how were people like you and I affected? You mentioned that we were ridiculed. How were you personally affected by it?
Well, you got to remember that, you know, and how old are you, Ralph?
I'm 72.
You're 72, so you're first generation hippie, right?
Absolutely. Well, I wasn't necessarily a hippie to smoke it, but I'll tell you how it came about. I lived in Jackson Heights, New York, growing up, in Queens. And in the very early 60s, there was a migration of Colombian folks to the United States. And they brought, in my neighborhood, what was called Colombian gold back then.
Oh, yeah.
And it was the best. It was the best we'd ever had. It was not only that; it was the first we ever had, and for a time, it was the only we ever had. And that's when my introduction came, and immediately came the ridicule of this. You get a pothead, this. You're going to turn into that, and what have you. And I didn't know from medicinal. I was having medicinal effects that I didn't put together with. I was just looking for the buzz. Turned out it was keeping me from the ravishing. I'd have 2 beers and I'd be sick for a week the next morning, that kind of thing. And it was changing my disposition in the fact that I was more peaceful. The food tasted better, the music was better. The only problem is
life was better.
I didn't exhale for about 3 years, but I learned to live with that. It was good, but the perception of people.
Well, here's what, we have this timeline from the 60s to now, right? And it's been, heavily repressed going into the 60s, and then the rebellion of the 60s. And the reason why people went to these drugs was because of the direct need for a change of consciousness. To get away from the alcohol syndrome of burying things under an alcohol buzz. We worked to the point of getting ourselves out in the open and talking about our psychology and our makeup and personal philosophies and development on a mental, spiritual level. We started the process of reconnecting those things that have been pulled apart. And over that long picture, in there we have Bob Marley shows up and he says that cannabis is for the healing of the nation. Nobody thought that he went actually literally for the healing of the fucking nation. But it turned out that way. 2005, I get diagnosed with prostate cancer. I know that I'm not going to do chemo and radiation because 6 of my friends and business colleagues were diagnosed at the same time, and none of them made it a year during my diagnosis, all because they picked standard treatment. And I went, I am not doing it. I'm not going down that way. I watched it happen to them, and I was like, fuck that. I'd rather die of cancer straight without any of that shit than deal with what they went through and have the quick road right out, And then you start, when you do the research and you dive into how it works and you see the process of how we've developed this cancerous kind of culture based on toxic environments that we live in and not understanding the body's function of being able to blow off toxins. Our doctors are not doing nothing but treating symptoms or trying to give you an inoculation for something that you don't need, And then we find out here that, wow, the reason that people evolved and pressed so hard to get close to this plant was that more than 100 years ago, the things that we ate were eating hemp and cannabis, and our cannabinoids were coming through our food, and that we actually have been suffering from being deprived of cannabinoids. And that is why we've gone into this health decline over a long period when we should be going up, not down, because science and technology has pushed us to a place where we are at the pinnacle in so many areas, except for medically. And you got to go. That's odd stuff,
Absolutely. How does cannabis affect the music industry? And one of my uncle's building mates was a drummer. He was Elvin Hayes. And I think I'm getting the wrong name after all these years. But I'm 16, and Elvin was his first name. Great drummer. It wasn't Hayes. Hayes was a basketball player. But in any event, I got an exposure to the music industry through him, and I realized drugs ran rampant in the music industry. How does it affect music? Tell people the benefit. Go ahead.
In the 60s, one of the things was, you went out, you bought a new piece of vinyl, you went home, you got some good weed or you smoked some hash, and you listened to that record and you studied it and you worshipped it note by note. And you were looking for some deeper meaning in what you were doing, right? And there was this commiseration and connection that happens when you smoke cannabis. You go to the deeper parts of the music and you feel it, right? And certainly the way music was recorded then gave it a warmer, more emotional content. And that turned into careers for people like my brother and myself. I mean, I worked at Hartman and Goodman for a good 20 years in the process of me doing my secret life And it was incredible. We managed America and Poco and Crosby, Stills and Nash and Peter, Paul and Mary, Michael Murphy, Dwight Twilley, and 25 other bands that never made it. And it was like that.
I assume you knew Mary Travers personally, obviously.
I did.
She,
yep,
I can't tell you what she meant personally, Peter, Paul, and Mary, but she was just a goddess to me. Is there anything about her that may interest me in the audience that we don't know?
She was an incredible woman, and we did one tour with them. That was their last. I believe it was their last record on CBS or I can't remember what, or it might have been Warner Brothers. And they only played 19 concerts on the whole tour, and they all sold out in advance. And when you went to the shows, it was really fascinating because, all the songs they play are these pretty much hits. They have a whole set of hits. And you are watching the audience and you see that, like, there's 90-year-old people out there, there's 50-year-old people, there's 30-year-old people, there's 16-year-old punk with a mohawk. Like, what the fuck? And you go, that's crazy right there. And it was like, and then people were singing along with like 3/4 of the songs, and by the time they get to Puff the Magic Dragon, there's not a dry eye in the house, and it was just incredible, and they all had their own interesting personalities. Paul Stuckey's a Christian, and Peter, lived in Malibu and was kind of a beachy guy, and she was a very aggressive woman, and she cornered me in an elevator once, and my brother had a rule: no sex with the clients. I had to decline the advance.
Right. You couldn't make an exception to the rule.
No.
Was that wrong? As George would say.
Yeah. Totally.
I had no idea. Had I been told that you weren't supposed to stoop the cleaning woman on the desk, it would have been totally different. You are a terrific guest. You are so open, and I just want to share the one thing with you. We're talking about legalization and what have you. The government got us because part of the side effects of inhaling is simply that it makes one vulnerable. And the government stepped right in on that vulnerability. Does that ring true?
I don't think so. The more you normalize its use, and I'll give you an example. Like here on the property where we've been in construction for 2 years, not until just 2 weeks ago when the JCLA, the Jamaican Cannabis Legalization Authority, put in some new rules in place, and one of them was no smoking on the job site. Anywhere on the job site, right? Or carrying, right? And up until that point, it was totally normal to see half of the crew walking around with a joint in their mouth. Men and women all day long, right? And it was cool because, like, the workers would even show up early and they'd have their breakfast joint, right? And we'd hang out. We'd all have our breakfast joint together, bless up together, and lubricated and ready for work, right? And these guys, they work their motherfucking asses off for $25 a day. Canadian. $20 US, right? And it's just mind-boggling. Like, basically, this whole castle, which is, about 7 stories tall. Four, but with the turret, it's about 7 stories tall. All built by hand mixing the concrete and mortar and bucket brigading it.
Yeah, the floors and all the floors. And
everything. All the floors, the ceilings. You just go, and they're almost done now. They're right at getting to the tail end of the job. It's just mind-boggling.
Paul,
when
who's
people
your
see
friend? Would you bring your friend on and just to say hello?
Oh, yeah. This is one of the guys who works here with me. His name is Derek Mitchell. Say hi, Derek.
hi.
Hey, Derek.
Derek,
how are you, sir?
Derek's busy making oil right now.
Oh, okay. That's a job you don't want to interrupt.
Yeah. You're talking with Ralph Tyko.
Oh, very good to meet you.
And the show is Canna Chat in the Zone. It's Comfortably Zoned Radio Network. I'm in Alameda, California. Where are you from?
Derek is Canadian as well. He's from Ontario.
Okay.
Oh, you're from Scotland? Oh, jeez. Well, there you go. I got a Scotsman here.
Well,
a Scot. You're not wearing a kilt.
I think we have to find a way to bring us all together. It might as well be cannabis that brings us all together as a world, really.
Yeah. Yes, absolutely. You know, I mean, if food and water can't do it, let's have cannabis do it.
Not alone, for sure.
Not alone.
Would you come back and catch up with us every now and again so we can follow your terrific efforts?
Oh, absolutely. You know, and we're just about 3 weeks from planting our first crop here, and so it's going to be quite an event. It was quite an event just getting to the final stage of licensing here, and actually to get the tier 3 is the hardest one to get here. So yeah. So it's pretty good, and I'd love to tell people about the progress and talk about anything else.
Beautiful. This has been terrific. I'm Ralph Tyko, Comfortably Zoned Radio Network, Canna Chat in the Zone. Privileged, Paul. Thank you again.
Thank you, Ralph.
All right. You guys have a great day, and thank you for listening, everybody. This was a thrill for me. Adios.
No problem, Ralph. Thank you.
The proceeding was a Comfortably Zoned Radio Network production. Thank you for listening.